Hello, my name is Jupiter Hadley, and I have no idea what was said before me because I only speak English. So this will be a talk in English. Hopefully things were good. Good morning, and thank you all for coming so early. We're going to be talking about game jams, the force of innovation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me, talk a little bit about game jams conceptually, so we're all on the same page of what a game jam is, and then go in and show you a handful of game jam games over the years that have really stood out to me specifically. So, I've done many things in video games. I started off being a YouTuber as a teenager, so as like a kid. But what I wanted to do specifically was cover all the games. I wanted to make games, but it turns out I don't know math very well and have no patience, and so development, not my thing. I learned about game jams through meeting developers, and they told me about game jams, but this was back when there were 3 game jams a year, mainly. It was Global Game Jam, Ludum Dare, and then this thing called Tag, where everyone was required to buy a website and a domain to host the next game jam, which was really complex in terms of actually having a game jam. Over time, other websites have made different ways to host game jams, so it's become a wider spread thing. As it grew, I started Indie Game Jams, which was just a calendar of all of the game jams so that I could keep track of it, because my goal at the time was to play every single game jam game ever made, which was sustainable and doable back then, but as time grew, it became unsustainable. I have played and reviewed 50,000 game jam games in my time, just game jam games, so I've seen a big perspective on lots of different jams and the quality from them. I also am the co-owner of Big Boss Battle. They review games, and I've written for Pocket Gamer, Debug Magazine, Rock Paper Shotgun, various other websites. So how many people have done game jams? Amazing, so a handful of people. I've participated in game jams too, they're really fun. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the general concept of game jams. So often game jams are under big time pressure. They're making a game in a very short amount of time, as opposed to sometimes indie developers can spend years making games before they're actually released. In this case, you're done and it's on an itch page or a Steam page at the end of the weekend, often. There's normally themes or diversifiers, so there'll be restrictions on what you can do. Some game jams are like, our theme is boats, and other game jams are like, you need to make it under 13 kilobytes, it needs to run in browser on this specific website, and also here's a code pack that we want you to incorporate somehow. So there's a big variety, and you can find game jams that are tailored to what you want to like sort of hone in on. Some have like asset packs released for that specific game jam. Others have mentors that can help you code. It's a great way to sort of learn and get down to making something quickly. A lot of game jams allow teams, a lot of people do solo stuff, but there's a community around them as well. And that's really important when it comes to indie developers and creating games in general. And there's a lot of online game jams, and then things like global game jams are in real life, on real places where you can meet real people. So there's a lot of reasons why people should do game jams. A lot of things when I've spoken to developers, they've said, it's all of the fun of game development. So it's taking the core thing that you want to make, making it, and then releasing it. It's not polishing, it's not finding bugs, it's not testing, it's working on the key mechanic that you think is going to be fun, and then creating it and just putting it out there, hoping it does well in that jam, and then you're done. You don't have to market a game jam game afterwards. You don't have to spend time building a community around your game jam to sell. It's like a little practice round where you can take some time to create something and do a full like mini development cycle. A lot of game jams are about focusing on the key fun thing in the game, and I feel that that brings a lot of innovation, because all you're doing is trying to take that key fun mechanic and make it playable in a weekend, in 3 days, and maybe a week at max. And doing that can help you hone in on one aspect of game development. It helps you think differently about themes and diversifiers so you can stand out. Gives you time to look at and reflect on what other people did with the same amount of time and resources that you had. There's a community around it that can give you feedback on what you've done. Some of them have prizes. On our website, on Indie Game Jams, you can check if they have monetary rewards, and that's often just great to have generally when you enter jams. there's lots of good reasons to jam, and I really find game jams to be one of the best parts of game development because I've had such a good time playing game jam games. So obviously I find jams on my website. That's just a plug for my website. I made it. You can use it. You can also find physical jams as well on it. It's pretty cool. There's a newsletter. Does the newsletter go out as often as I'd like? No, but you could sign up for it. I send out blasts when there's like bigger game jams that I feel you should participate in because there are a lot of game jams going on. There's lots of reoccurring game jams like Ludum Dare, Global Game Jam, Asylum Jam. Actually, I'll tell you about each of them. Ludum Dare is 2 days or 3 days, depending on what rules you want to follow, and it's online. It's like the biggest online jam. Global Game Jam is the biggest in-person jam. They have sites all around the world. Asylum Jam is a little different. It's yearly, but it's about taking mental health and using it in a game jam in a way that's not offensive to mental health issues. So it's looking at mental health from a different point of view, and then you get feedback from people who are like, this is the wrong way to do it, this is the right way to do it. The Game Maker Toolkit Jam comes from Game Maker Toolkit, who releases loads of tutorials for Game Maker, asset packs, lots of just resources, and his game jam's really big. It's one of the bigger ones. The Adventure Jam is based on narrative adventure games. You get a bit of a longer time because it's narrative driven. The Bitsy Jam is a game jam for those who can't make games. If you don't program games, Bitsy Jam is for you. They have an engine that runs in browser. I'll show you a game from Bitsy. And it's so easy to use that you don't actually need to code. So if you're an artist looking to get into a game jam to just see what you can make, Bitsy is really fun. The GM48 is run by Game Maker as well, and they give out like licenses often so that you can try Game Maker to participate in their jam. The one GAM is one game a month, which is more of a challenge where you can make a game every month and submit it to a community of people who are also spending a month making a game if you're looking for something a bit longer. So how come there became so many game jams in my lifetime? It was mainly due to websites making tools for it. There was clearly people that wanted to run game jams. As great as Global Game Jam and Ludum Dare was, there were other people that had other ideas and other ways of running jams. So Game Jolt started a game jam system, and I got to be the first person to ever test their game jam system, which was very fun. And then Itch very quickly afterwards also released their own way to host jams. People do host jams on their own websites that they create as well, but having these ways to make a jam is pretty interesting. Studios have done internal game jams and also opened up game jams on these platforms to see what other people would make with these concepts. And because it's so much easier to make these game jams, there has become so many different ones to look for. If you want to find a specific theme, if you want a specific prize, if you want to work on a specific engine, they're all available just because of the accessibility to make game jams. They're really fun. A lot of game jam games are experimental. A lot of different game jams that take place all over the world have different cultural aspects to them. And they're often short games. That's why I play so many of them. Because they're made in such a short amount of time, the game loop can be played in a short amount of time. So it's very interesting to see what people hone into and what people spend their time making to submit for the end of that jam. And they're really quick prototypes. So studios started creating these game jams within their internal studio to test different concepts and mechanics, and then they show the mechanics that they've created to the wider studio and see what ones people gel with and what ones do well, and then they've fleshed those out into full games just internally as a part of internal, non-public ways of running studios, which was very interesting to see. There's actually a post-mortem later today by Adam, and he's going to talk about how his game came from an internal game jam and now is a fully fledged game they launched and did really, really well. So I'm going to show you a selection of games from game jams that have stuck out in my mind over the last 11 years of playing game jam games. Some of them are going to be games you've never heard of that only exist in small corners of the internet, and other ones are going to be games that did get big, they did get released, and they came from game jams. So Odyssey was a part of the Train Jam. Train Jam's interesting. It's done on a train from Chicago to San Francisco as they travel there for GDC. So you've got Wi-Fi issues, you've got connectivity issues, you've got just having power as an issue, and loads of people make games. It's really casual. This one has these little frogs, and the perspective in the world was something that I hadn't seen come from a game jam, the way the graphics were, and it was just bizarre. There wasn't really a theme per se submitted that year, and the way that these characters think that frogs are balloons and fish don't know what frogs were, and you're looking to like find out where you are in the swamp, but it's really ambiguous what your entire end goal was. The whole thing that they focused on was practicing dialogue writing in a fun way and trying to model in a different perspective, and I feel like they did a really good job of that, and it just made something that was weird. I'm now flying with a balloon frog that I'm being told is definitely not in pain, and it's not a balloon, and it was just wild and strange, and I think some of the most wild concepts come from game jams. I think it's a time when you don't have to be marketable, so you can take the time to think of something really strange in your own head and bring it to life. So Baba Is You, thank you, did really well. It was a new way of thinking about puzzle games. It came from the Nordic Game Jam, and it's a way of sort of introducing coding to people, because you're taking this something is something and you're able to change them with words to change what you're able to do. And this was a different concept, a different way of doing puzzle games. And it was so bizarre to me as someone who hadn't played a puzzle game like this but had played so many puzzle games, to think about exactly what you're doing and to read what you're able to do and then have to think about how to not do that and how to manipulate that level to be something different. Since Baba Is You's out, they've continued on with other games that have similar stuff, and there's been a lot of games that have tried to take that concept and run with it, but there was nothing like this before. It was so interesting to see it come out of a game jam game, and it won, which is why they continued working on it. They got so much positive feedback on it. So this is a Bitsy. So I really like the Bitsy Games engine because it is a game engine where this is just little pixel art drawn within the engine, and then you type in words and you just highlight in color stuff you want to interact with, and you can create very simplistic puzzles, and you can manipulate the words so they're a bit more interesting. But the whole game is made with no code. It's an engine that this guy called Adam made and put out on the internet for free to use. He runs these different game jams that run every month on a one-word theme, and you don't even need to use the theme. It's got a huge community around it, specifically on Discord, and they're always manipulating the engine and trying to put code in it and trying to change the way it works. But on a simplistic, I just want to make a project over the weekend that's cute and adorable and maybe about a dog or a cat, it's a really good engine for those who are curious about game jams but maybe don't have the experience to sit there and develop games and want to try something different. The Bitsy Jam itself, this is from the Self-Care Jam, but the Bitsy Jam itself, everyone's really supportive as well, even if you don't finish something, even if you just make a title screen. And so it's a game jam that feels so low pressure and so valuable in terms of community and finding other people who might be interested in just creating something. So another Ludum Dare game, One Room Dungeon. This was licensed as a browser-based game, so it went on to be licensed on websites like Armor Games. And what was really interesting about this, and I had to try so hard to not die, is you kind of rush around the room to collect these dots, and then you slam the wall, and where you're slamming the wall, it kills and resets the enemies, but you end up learning that certain directions give you certain enemies and certain challenges, and you're trying to build your way up to those bigger things on the top bar, the bigger little pillars, which are boss fights. And the chaos of sitting there and playing this and trying to figure out what tiles you're meant to run out, what side of the room you want to burst into, what enemies to avoid, because there's no way to kill anything. It's only through the shifting of the room that you end up destroying any enemies. And that was such an alien concept to me, that it's all about like avoidance, survival, and then hoping that you can make it to a boss and hoping that you can survive long enough in the boss room to be able to move to the next. It was just something I'd never seen before. And it's a very unique way of going about sort of fighting and action and semi-stealth, I suppose. And this theme was all about one room, so the game was meant to take place in one room. In that version of Ludum Dare, a lot of people just had one screen that you could do lots of stuff in. So seeing one screen that you're just slightly changing, that's getting harder and harder and building, was really interesting. So, thank you. Forager was part of a game jam. It then released, it had an Xbox release, it did really, really well. It's just cute and adorable and well polished, but it wasn't always that way. When the game first started, it was just this concept of go around, mine, build ore, sort of like Minecraft. And then they added a bunch of other features and different worlds, and it really shows what a game jam game can become. The first release of this game wasn't particularly well received. It didn't place in the awards. The guy just really liked what he had started building and spent more free time building that up, creating crafting systems, creating new biomes and worlds that you can go into, and spent a lot of time fully fleshing out this game. I've spent so long playing this on Xbox, particularly in my living room, and I've had so much fun building different machines and finding the fairies that are hidden in worlds and trying to help them enough where they care about what I'm doing so that they can then help me. There's so much that you can discover, and it's almost a free-form game. And as you play, you can pick sort of different things that you want to focus on, different hidden secrets, and it all came out of a game jam. And they were able to get a publisher from it and continue working on it, and it was really, really successful in the end. Shadows of the Red Hand is made by one of my favorite developers of game jams of all time, and he's sort of an interesting person. His name is Andy404 online, and he isn't looking to become a game developer. He is a software engineer who has a boring day job, and he loves his boring day job. But he takes a theme and he just changes the way his brain works, and every time there is a game jam, his rendition of the theme is so different from any other version of the game jam game. So this one, I believe shadow was the theme, or some word that seemed like shadow. So he made all of the graphics in his game out of hand models to make shadow puppets, obviously. And he's not looking for any sort of commercial success whenever he makes these games. It's purely he wants to make a game. This is the game he's made. Have at it what you will, and he moves on with his life. And that sort of, I guess, throwaway nature of game jams, the fact that at the end of the game jam, it got dark in here. The fact that at the end of the game jam, you don't have to do anything. You can just be completely done with it, and it can just be a small project, has made so many interesting concepts. Andy-Man has entered game jams as well with just like title screens, which is very bizarre to me. But some of the title screens he's made are interactive, so therefore a game, and that practice of sort of looking at what you can do within that time limit and what you could submit is a good exercise. This is another one by him for the One Tap Jam, which was about having a game where your only input is a single key that you can tap at any point. And so obviously, with that concept, the first thing that came to mind for him was a mutant mole rat matchmaker game, where you first start off on Tinder, but all of these different likes and dislikes show how you're going to be controlling in the next part of the game. So you need to quickly find almost a set of controls that you think would be good. And then you move on into the second aspect of the game, which is all about trying to actually get to your date in time. But those button sizes are based on those likes and dislikes, and the level generation is based on those likes and dislikes. And even if you make it, you might not have enough likes and dislikes to be compatible. So it's just so bizarre and so out there and doesn't make any sense, but is something I've never seen again and never saw after that point. This is a totally, to me, unique game. And a lot of Andy's games are like that. If you're ever looking for a game developer to follow that will consistently surprise you and make you wonder exactly how they think. And I think part of that is not having any commercial gain out of game jams and just spending the time to create something because you want to take a break and create something. This game was extremely difficult. I don't think anyone's ever actually beaten it correctly. I don't know if it's possible. And that's also a part of game jams. Sometimes they're unfinished and they don't have an ending. And it's quite freeing, Andy said, it's quite freeing to not have to design an actual wrap-up to the end of your games. Hell was part of a Game by Its Cover jam. This was a pretty unique jam where everyone was given sort of fake NES cartridges, and then they needed to create a game around that fake cartridge. So in this game, you can just crack eggs, kind of Wario style, and you can do that infinitely. You can just keep cracking an egg into a pan. But the moment you fail, which I didn't realize you could even fail at first because it's very easy to crack an egg into a pan, there's actually an entire RPG on the back end. You're now a chick, and you can leave your house because you're not an egg anymore. And you didn't fail or lose the game. This is actually the game. You were failing before when you were doing it correctly. That sort of twist was so funny to me the first time I played. I thought, wow, this person didn't have much time. They made an egg cracking game, that's fine. But no, you become a whole chicken, you lay another egg, that egg becomes a whole chicken, and you start your life in this world. But it doesn't stop there either. They've then continued the game further than this little starting point, which was also very surprising. And I think there's a lot of aspects of being able to be innovative in a surprising way in Game Jam games. You don't have to follow a formula. So at the point where you have the baby chick, you explore further. And then you're in hell. I don't know why you're in hell, but you are, maybe the game title. And in hell, you have to eat the 7 deadly sins, or in some way defeat them. I ate a lot of them because I felt that was the best thing for me to be doing. But there are different ways to take on these sins and explore this world. And I didn't think that was gonna be from an egg cracking Wario style game. And I spent a long time, about 2 minutes, just cracking eggs, wondering what would happen if I got to 100. And it turns out the whole time I just needed to miss to get to the full game. And he did on his game page put a picture of hell, but also just lots of pictures of egg cracking. And so I didn't even understand that was later in the game. Freedom Through the Lens was for the Resist Jam. At one point in time, there were a lot of political game jams, which was really fantastic to see. And sorry for this video being laggy. And in this specific game jam game, it was about exploring a huge riot, a huge protest. And as you're going through the protest, you have no background information. You have no idea what you're going into. You've been hired for a job, and your job is to go in, talk to people who are a part of this protest, form an opinion, write an article. But with no background information, you start talking to people who have like really, really strong opinions, people who just happen to be in the park, people who are mad that protests are going on and it's disrupting their lovely day. People that don't want to talk to you because you're a journalist and that's inherently bad and they can't be seen talking about these opinions. And I'm someone who's never gone to a protest. I live in England where protests are a bit hairy. I used to live in America where protests are more acceptable and a part of like more rights stuff. So seeing sort of going to a protest and these different aspects of protesting, and you're not sure what's being protested, you don't have a fully functioned opinion around that, is really interesting, and I think it does a very good job of showing the different perspectives of people who might be at a protest, almost as an educational game, to have more like empathy towards other people and their thoughts and opinions, which is still really relevant today in a lot of stuff that's going on. And it was just a different sort of perspective on what can be done in more serious games like that. Another kind of serious one is The Mind is a Small Place. I know the creator of this game very well. We hung out a whole lot, and then he stopped. He just stopped in his life, and he was not anywhere. He went from this super bubbly guy who you could always see at like these little workshops and groups and co-working spaces, and then he was gone. And we reached out, and he was like, yeah, no, it's okay. No, I'm just busy right now, works a lot. He was going through depression, and he was going through lots of mental health struggles. And he made this game for Ludum Dare as a way of working through the end of his struggles. And all of these different rooms are representative of feelings in himself, and these bits of dialogue are things that his parents said to him as he continued to disconnect from other people and stopped being a present person. And he used this game to explain to a lot of us his mental state when he was done, because he didn't want to talk about why he suddenly wasn't friends with everyone and why he wasn't going to gatherings. At the very end of this game, based on the perspective, there are two choices. There's like a rose and a skull. And if you pick the skull, there's a monologue that he wrote about what would happen if he died and how other people would react on that perspective, and that the skull isn't the right choice for him, and that instead he picked the rose and to live on. And the fact that he used a game jam to kind of work through these emotions, presented it to a bunch of other people in the jam, it's just something that you don't see in commercial games at all. It's such a personal, unique thing. And I've played a couple of game jam games that have been super personal like that as a tool to work through your problems and be able to present them. And other people have related to his game and have looked at his game and been like, I've been in that space, and this is a really good point when I've picked more darker routes. Going on to a more fun game, the U-Jam was really interesting because it wanted you to think about something you did every day and gamify it. And this was about someone who didn't work in games, and currently his commute was 2 hours. So he had to get up so early in the morning and would sleep on the train and try to sleep enough to still get off and be there on time and not end up missing work. But at the same time, he was always exhausted. So this is a balancing act where you can see the different stops, and the only time the train moves is when you're sleeping, but you need to get up at your stop. If you get up at the other stops, it ends the game and you lose. So you can win, but how many times can you sleep throughout it? Was a thing that he was testing. If he goes in earlier, he did this in real life. If he went in earlier, would he be able to sleep more on the train, and would that be more beneficial? And I just thought this was a really interesting way to look at such a mundane thing like riding the train and gamifying it. The different graphics ended up being really cool, and it's just kind of fun. The Radio Audit Jam is a good example of taking history. The Radio Audit Jam, the Global Game Jam game, Radio Audit, is a very good example of taking history, studying it for coursework, studying it because you're really interested, and turning it into a game jam game. This person had studied a bunch about this time period and about the history around this, and then created an interactive game jam game as a way to like further his interest in this part of history. And it turned out to be a really polished game because he has so much knowledge around its mob stuff and the history around a couple of mobs and how they grew to power and didn't grow to power and stuff around that. But taking your interest and being able to present it in a game jam or in a game really can change not only other people's interest in that, but also is just a great way of presenting your knowledge through your medium. So a lot of people who make games need to have other hobbies, and other hobbies are like important to being a well-rounded person and not burning out. But looking at your hobbies and at the things that you have further interest in and creating them into a small game is really fun. Face Out is another game by its cover. This was a different year. Face Out continued and was revamped after the jam, but not for commercial release. They took the concept of Pong, which I feel like is done day in and day out. Pong's a very simple concept. But they made it a way of killing, which, again, very interesting to me, the way that people decide to have killing in their games without just like guns. And you are literally breaking apart this guy's face using a Pong ball and a sword in a story-based game about being a samurai and living through life. It's such a weird game, and when it came out, it was buggy. Like, it was almost unplayable, and they did spend some time deepening the story and fixing a lot of the bugs because so many people were like, this is great. However, I can't get past the second level because the whole game freezes. But that wasn't a deterrent enough for them to not continue and work on it, and they created something that was really fun in the end and released on Steam. There is more Pong bits in this, but there is also a whole story aspect to it that tells you why you're Ponging your way through being a samurai and why this all makes sense and ties together as well, and about your quest to, I don't know, murder Pong people throughout the rest of the world, and you do a good job of doing that. Double Kick Heroes is another game that completely released. They actually showcased it at Gamescom and then got a publisher and released. It was a rhythm-based action shooter where they had created the music for it after the game with a band, and then they created a music maker as well, which was something they talked about in a post-mortem for Ludum Dare just to like further their presence on that website. And in their post-mortem, people were so excited about the ability to create your own levels that they then created a secondary game, which was just creating your own levels, and then they created a third game that's also within the genre of music, rhythm, action, and have continued their studio based on this being their first successful game for them. It was really interesting to see. And it was great to see it ahead of time at its base and them reacting to the feedback they got on having that sort of system where you can make your own music, and then them creating a whole game after that was great to see. And having that community to drive them in that direction through game jams was really wonderful. The Lion Song is another released game. This was a several episode series, and this is a narrative example. Not a lot of narrative games get made in game jams because of the time restraint when it comes to writing. But this game is absolutely beautiful. It is about a composer who has writer's block, but needs to create music. So she goes to a cabin in the woods, as all good writers with writer block do. And there she starts struggling with herself until a random man calls and is like, hi, you're in a cabin in the woods. And she's like, this is actually really creepy. I don't know what's happening and why you're calling me. I've rented this cabin in the woods to be alone. And he's like, no, I need your help. I need someone to talk to. And you can sort of go through that story and figure out exactly what he wants and exactly how he's gonna help you while you're snowed into this cabin. The first episode is free and ends on a huge cliffhanger and is just like the Ludum Dare game with like a little bit more added on the end. And then they released other episodes as paid to add-ons, which is very clever. This was revamped right after the game jam and worked on for quite some time before it was fully released. Party Hard is one of my favorite game jam games that I've played ever. I really like it. It's the Indies versus PewDiePie jam, which kind of sucked, but you know, we had some good games out of it, I guess. Party Hard is a stealth game. I hate stealth games, but in this one, you're murdering everyone in very unique ways. So the whole storyline is, it's late, you're sick of parties, you want to go to bed, everyone's throwing parties, so you're going to murder them. Very, very, easy solution to your problem. So, but you don't want to get caught by the police. Inside each of these different levels, there's like 50 different ways that you could murder an individual, and you need to wait for their loops to put them alone, set traps, or straight up murder them, and then not get caught and hide or dispose of their body, or let people get frantically upset, but they might notice you if they're frantically upset because you're not. This went on to make a second game. It got a publisher. It was doing really well. PewDiePie really liked it. It was his game jam. He picked it as one of the best. And it was a really interesting way of seeing stealth games and seeing how you could set up a level to then, I suppose, murder people. It's really fun to play through if you haven't played it. There is a free demo of this game, and it's worth it if you like stealth games, or if you hate stealth games and you like tactical murder. When Nothing Came is another interesting concept. So this person wanted to make a narrative game. They didn't have time to make a narrative game. Instead, they took a poem and started making puzzles out of them. So you're able to take different words in these poems and influence the storyline to change what's happening. It really challenges players to think about these individual words, think about how they could be better in the poem, better used to manipulate what you're doing, and then change them. But the gameplay is you're going forward in the timeline, and then you're going backwards in the timeline, and you're adjusting things, and then playing forward in the timeline to see how much of a difference that makes. It's a lot of trial and error, but it's such a unique concept and a unique way to sort of explore this timeline that's straightforward. Everything's super minimal in it, and so there wasn't a big focus on graphic design. It was just on the mechanic of dragging bits of the poem and moving the timeline. And then lastly, we have this game, which is, I'm so slow at it because I suck at thinking of words, but it's like a spin on the concept of Scrabble. So it's a very basic platformer. You need to find a certain number of stars within the level to move on to the next level. And here you have different words, and then on the sidebar you also have letters, and you have to think of words that you build onto the letters so that you could then build platforms to follow these tiny little arrows to get to different areas of the game. And this way of like editing it and moving it around, such an interesting concept, only something that I saw out of a game jam. And it felt so unique for those who, like, Scrabble's such a classic board game. This person thought, well, what if I made it a platformer and played on it? And then we got to play on it. Game jams have spent a lot of time showcasing lots of games and rewarding lots of games that have done something different. And I think that's, at this point, the only way to stand out in a lot of game jams. It's to take a theme like One Room Dungeon, like words, and to change exactly the way that people would think about that, and to change the theme in a way that is a different perspective. And through not having to make something commercial, not having to spend time polishing, we come out with really unique and innovative game jam games. That's the end of my talk. I hope that you found a really fun game that you want to play, and I hope you do play some of them. And do check out game jams. They have really amazing things going on in them, and participate in one. They're great.